Science has shown that there was no global flood. Scary? Let me take you on a little trip. Before we start, you probably noticed that you are listening to an AI voice. Watch this video to learn why. My church taught me how the world was made. It was different from what my elementary, junior, and high schools taught. I had to know why. It was time to go to college. One of my goals was to find out why. The answer leaves me scratching my head even now, 40 years later, with 2 PhDs under my belt. The journey started out with no worries. After all, Jesus said that the truth would set me free. In no time, I was terrified. I went to college to study biblical archaeology. Archaeology is a branch of anthropology. I certainly did not expect to hear about Adam and Eve, because it was a state university. However, the human race began with more than 2 individuals, and humanity started in Africa, and not Iraq, the traditional site of the Garden of Eden. I couldn't take it anymore. Fortunately, I thought, my major required a course in historical geology, fossils, and whatnot. It was my chance to stop worrying about the origin of mankind. I switched majors from anthropology to geology. No worries. There was a global flood, and the world started over with 8 individuals anyway. Everything was okay. Not so fast. I pulled the trigger too soon. Yes, I avoided hearing that 8 was not enough, but, according to geologists, there is no evidence of a global flood. Looking at fossils meant seeing, for myself, that the world was not the world that my church taught. All life did not spring forth at the same time. Fortunately, again, other courses took my mind off the problem that the Bible was not matching the real world. As a geologist, or at least as someone who believes what smart people tell you, you know that there is no global unconformity, which would be evidence of a global flooding event. You might know the 4 unconformities. 1. Disconformity. 2. Paraconformity. 3. Angular unconformity. And 4. Nonconformity. So, there is no evidence for a global flood. Scholars have pointed out that Noah's flood is very similar to other contemporary flood stories, particularly the Epic of Gilgamesh. At first, that was really scary. Then things started to make sense to me. It is important to establish that the Bible is God's Word. A proper understanding of the Bible is essential. God told the ancient Jews a story that they understood. If we exchange something that is in the Bible with something that is not there but it ought to be there, we are risking everything. Maybe distorting God's message to us. We may be preventing people from hearing the gospel. I cannot tell you how many stories I've heard where someone rejects the gospel because they could no longer believe something in the Bible that is not there. Others profess to believe something that, in their heart of hearts, they do not believe. I kept a lot of things to myself. One of those things is that there is no geological evidence for a global flood. At the same time, I became convinced that I cannot lose my salvation. If you have it, you can't lose it. If you lost it, you never had it. Once again, I can examine my question without worrying about losing my salvation. Consider the problem of not researching a culture. You might miss out on truth. As an anthropologist, you know about the ancient flood stories recorded by several cultures. So, some flooding event or events linked to these stories. If that is true, and if it is true that Genesis recounts a worldwide deluge, I can think of only 2 solutions. One is absolutely unacceptable. The Bible has errors in it. The other is that ancient Jews were masters of hyperbole. It turns out that literary scholars ranging from atheists to conservative Christians take that position. Why say that a big flood was the greatest flood ever? Because God is so majestic. That explains so much. That leads to the next video, but let's finish this one. I studied science, but Noah's flood is not a matter of science. I wish that I had known. It is a matter of literature. Because there is no evidence for the existence of a great flood does not mean that there is no great God. It does mean that we should study similar other literature.